Hello, my name is Nicholas Connor, and this is my presentation on Cuba. Cuba is the largest island country located in the Caribbean Sea. It lies approximately 90 miles south of the United States and has a population of more than 11 million people. The capital city, Havana, is home to more than 2 million people, about 20% of the total population. Being in the Caribbean, Cuba has a tropical climate and enjoys warm weather year-round. Cuba does face threats annually from hurricanes and is vulnerable to severe weather. From an agricultural perspective, Cuba's main crops and exports are sugarcane and citrus products. The island features nearly 4,000 kilometers of coastline and is home to many unique plants and animals. Cuba is considered the most biodiverse country in the Caribbean, with nearly half of all its plant and animal species endemic to the area. While the economy has long struggled to grow and many aspects of the country are considered to be outdated, Cuba is a world leader in education and healthcare. 12.8% of the country's GDP is dedicated to education expenditures, the highest rate in the world. This investment in education has led to a literacy rate of 99.8%, one of the highest marks in the world. Cuba offers free healthcare to all of its citizens, and the health industry is completely nationalized by the government. Cuba has the highest rate of doctors per 10,000 people, at 67, nearly 3 times the US rate. The Cuban government is considered to be communist and is strongly guided by Marxist-Leninist beliefs. The government is dominated by the Cuban Communist Party, the only political party in the country. The Castro family ruled as the leaders of the government and the Cuban Communist Party from 1959 until 2019. In 2019, Raul Castro stepped down as the executive leader of the government, but he still retains his position as head of the party. Cuba has a long and messy history full of corruption, exploitation, and foreign influence. Cuba began as a Spanish colony in the 15th century, and the indigenous population was quickly wiped out by disease. The Spanish began importing slaves and quickly turned the island into an extractive colony, focused on sugarcane. Spain remained in control off and on until the Spanish-American War at the turn of the 20th century. In 1898, following years of fighting and independence movements, led by artists such as José Martí, Cuba was officially separated from Spain and became a U.S. protectorate. From this point on, the U.S. has continuously played a direct role in the development of Cuba, whether in advantageous or disadvantageous ways. In 1901, Cuba was considered independent and wrote a new constitution. However, written into this constitution was the right of the United States to intervene in all financial and foreign affairs. The Platt Amendment, as it was known in the United States, allowed for nearly complete governance of the country. For the next 50 years or so, weak governments came and went, usually preceded and succeeded by small revolutions and political skirmishes. During this time, the U.S. was also relegated from an official government involvement to more of an under-the-table influence. In 1952, Fulgencio Batista rose to power following a military-led coup. Batista had previously served a term as the country's elected president, but returned with force to take back his seat. Batista suspended the constitution, outlawed the Communist Party, and aligned himself favorably with the United States. During his reign as dictator, the upper class thrived while the lower class became disenfranchised and suffered. Poverty and inequality were rampant, and the elites walked all over the poor. U.S. businesses were more than happy to take full advantage of this opportunity and exploited the land and people to line their own pockets. According to a speech made by then-Senator John F. Kennedy in 1960, at the beginning of 1959, U.S. companies owned about 40% of the Cuban sugar lands, almost all the cattle ranches, 90% of the mines and mineral concessions, 80% of the utilities, and practically all of the oil industry, and supplied 2/3 of Cuba's imports. Aggravated by the state of the country and the exploitation of the people, Fidel Castro led a communist revolution against the Batista government in the late 1950s. Castro, his brother Raul, and their ally Che Guevara led the rebel forces and ultimately emerged victorious in January of 1959. The United States was initially in favor of this revolution, believing it was a chance to bring democracy to the country. However, this sentiment would not last, as the new government wasted no time enacting new communist legislation. A series of agrarian land reform laws were passed over the course of the next several years that divvied up large plantations and ranches, assigning the land to the government and poorer citizens. Additionally, it became illegal for foreigners to own sugar plantations, and petroleum industries were nationalized without compensation, further forcing out and upsetting the United States. In response, the United States began economic sanctions against Cuba and even attempted to depose Castro in the embarrassing fiasco known as the Bay of Pigs invasion. This invasion was a failed attempt by the CIA to train Cuban exiles to fight back against the communist revolution. Its failure was instrumental in pushing Cuba to align with the Soviet Union, further fracturing relations. An economic embargo has been in place since 1960, prohibiting trade, tourism, and most other economic relations between the U.S. and Cuba. The embargo has caused irreconcilable damage to Cuba. According to estimates from the Cuban government and the United Nations, the embargo has cost the Cuban economy $130 billion since its implementation. Under President Obama, efforts were made in his second term to normalize some of these relations between the U.S. and Cuba. However, these efforts have stalled or completely reversed under President Trump. The communist law of Cuba has affected every facet of life in the country. One particularly interesting area that exemplifies this is religion. Prior to the Castro Revolution, the overwhelming majority of the population was devoutly Catholic. Even Fidel Castro himself attended Catholic school as a child. However, religion was greatly persecuted in the early years of the Castro regime. According to communist ideology, the political party is the most important institution and demands complete loyalty. In turn, there was no room for any other beliefs, such as religion. To ensure loyalty and minimize the risk for political deviance, the Castro government worked to limit the scope and influence of religion on the island, specifically the Catholic Church. Castro nationalized Catholic schools, shut down churches, and expelled many foreign priests. This remained the status quo for several decades until Cuba was struck by the Special Period, a particularly grueling economic recession caused by the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Special Period caused widespread famine and poverty amongst Cubans. In a time of desperation, Cuba was forced to seek relief from other countries and institutions, including the Catholic Church. Castro invited Pope John Paul II to the island, and slowly the government has repealed many of the restrictive laws that inhibited religion from being practiced. The Catholic Church has become somewhat of a diplomatic ally in recent years, and has worked as a middleman in restoring relations between Cuba and the United States. As it stands now, the majority of the population is considered Christian, but more in name than in practice. There are still some discrepancies between what is written as the law versus how it is enforced, with many claiming churches still face some form of persecution. Cuba is a very unique country, both in Latin America and the world as a whole. Its isolation has created a one-of-a-kind environment. It is a world leader in education and healthcare, but suffers from failing infrastructure, a stagnant economy, and is well known for its outdated cars. Like most Latin American countries, it has been subject to extensive influence from the United States, but stands apart in the severity of this influence. Furthermore, in many ways, there is no unified Cuban culture. When someone says they are Mexican or Colombian, there's an idea that this represents, a shared experience. This is not the case with Cuba. Because of the barriers dividing the citizens of Cuba from those who have emigrated away, two different identities have formed, one frozen in the past and one completely intermixed with American themes. Currently, the government is slowly relenting from its strict communist law and beginning to adopt more business-friendly policies. It is obviously beneficial to both the Cuban people and the United States to resume regular trade and relations. In both countries, younger generations are coming to power. The old guard that established these restrictions is slowly being phased out. The Cuban people have long wished for an end to the embargo, and sentiment in the United States is changing as well. Fidel Castro died in 2016, and every day his brother Raul is closer to stepping down completely. A new constitution was ratified in 2019 that recognizes the right to private property for the first time in decades, and steps are being taken towards a more libertarian economy. President Obama visited Cuba in 2016, and embassies were restored in both countries. It seems like a reconciliation is inevitable, but neither country is willing to give in yet. Cuba is a country that is personally very significant. My grandparents were born and raised in Cuba, but left during Castro's revolution. They immigrated to the United States as a young married couple with an infant, settling in New York and then ultimately Miami. I grew up hearing their stories about their family farms, their neighborhood friends, and the country they loved so much. I chose Cuba to study during this class because I think it's critically important to learn more about my family's past and how it influences who I am today. Thank you for the opportunity to do this, and thank you for listening to my presentation.